Hey everyone, this is Jay Stein, and this is the Chart of the Week series on the Devery YouTube channel, where each week we look at your favorite Dynasty assets and talk about whether buy, sells, and holds. And we're going to do another listener requested guy here. We're going to look at Mike Evans and why I think he's somewhere between a hold and a sell in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Let's get to work. So, hey, welcome back, everyone. I'm trying to keep these things short, so let's get right to it. This is the Mike Evans chart. This is his KTC chart, or KeepTradeCut. That's a website that uses crowdsourcing by asking the people that visit the site whether they keep, trade, or cut certain players. Then they have an algorithm that comes up with values. It's basically a sentiment indicator, and this blue line here is Mike Evans KTC over time. The blue line starts on April 1st, 2020 at around 78.50 KTC and ends at the end of March here at around 35.50. The max was actually the first day of this chart, April 1st, 2020, and the min on this chart was around January 2nd, 2023. So we've come up a little bit from there. And that minimum value or minimum KTC was around 33.50. The red dashed line that goes through the center of the chart, that is his average KTC over this time horizon. That's around 5,200 KTC. The blue dashed lines above and below that red dashed line, those are the one standard deviation of the series. So the top line is around 6,300 and the bottom line is around 4,100. The solid red line, that's the 150-day moving average of the solid blue line. And what happens is when that red line and that blue line intersect or move away from each other, those will give you decision points. The purple bands that you see going through throughout the chart, those are at the in-season time, so weeks 1 through 17 or weeks 1 through 18. And the white areas represent the fantasy offseason. I have a gray line in here. Last week we drew a channel. This week we're drawing one straight line. That is representing a base of around 4,300 KTC. So Evans, fell from April of 2020 all the way to this base of around 4,300, where he stayed there from September 2021 to November 2022. So over a year at that 4,300 level basing. And what I mean by basing is going down, touching the line, bouncing back up, and doing it over and over and over again until you get this nice base where there's this level that people are comfortable with from a KTC perspective. I'd argue around November is when he breaks through that. And I'd argue because he spent so much time at that 4,300 level basing, now that line is going to act like a ceiling, i.e. something that's going to be really tough to break through at some point. So I would expect that 4,300 KTC level to be the upper bound, to be the ceiling, which actually represents about 20% upside from current levels. And that would be sort of his upside would be sort of capped at that level until he breaks through, in which case we'd have to make a new analysis at that point. So that's the upper bound. Now let's talk about where I think he should actually trade. So my process, which is explained in my latest article out on the Football Guys called the Dynasty Investor, is about looking about KTC versus fantasy points per game for value. And the KTC versus fantasy points per game, I have a ratio called the PE ratio. And then I use that PE ratio in a comparable analysis to come up with price targets and have upside and downside for these guys. So my price target using that process, that PE process, for Mike Evans is around a 3,200, where it works out to be about 9% downside from current levels, or about 350 KCC lower from where he's trading at currently. So this doesn't actually qualify in the way I do it as somebody that stand out as a top sell in my book, as the potential downside isn't great enough to be pounding the table here, but there is some overvaluedness. There is some downside to his price. So it may warrant some moving around, and that's why I'm sort of in between that hold and sell category. So my Evans comp group, my cluster group for him, is wide receivers that are 29 years or older, and score between 16 and 20 fantasy points per game. So that cluster includes Evans, of course, Hopkins, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, Brandon Cooks, and Michael Thomas. So those are the guys that I'm using in that comparable valuation process with the PE ratio. And we're looking at, again, it's KTC versus projected fantasy points per game. Which one looks like the better value? So a few weeks ago, we talked about that age cliff at wide receivers, and we had all four of these guys in this cluster on a chart. It was Tyreek Hill, Diggs, Kupp, and Devontae Adams. They're all over 29, so the age-wise, they're the same thing, 29 or older. They were actually still scoring 20 plus fantasy points per game, so they were in a different scoring bracket. But you can see all of them hit that age cliff over the last few years, where as you got to 29, 30, 31, your price kept falling and falling and falling, even though you were producing it at the similar levels. The same has happened with this age cliff, the Evans cluster. So all of these guys have come down. And come down already. So remember, the analogy I used was be careful about catching the falling knife, and it's better to let the guy bottom out and base and complete that basing process, like we saw with Evans was able to do. But then he fell back through the floor of that process. So, we want to let him hit the floor, complete a basing process, maybe tick up a little bit before we start to actually get into Mike Evans again. That's how I'd be kind of looking at what I would expect from this chart. So from a trading perspective, if you wanted to trade with Evans, I'd be looking to trade down the age curve with Evans. So something like Mike Evans for Rashad Bateman would work for me, or possibly a Mike Evans for like a Wayndale Robinson plus more. So plus more in terms of draft picks or other players or something like that. From a pick perspective, he's about an early second from a KTC pricing standpoint. So that maybe turns into something like what a Josh Downs range would be, or a Michael Mayer or a Devin Achane, what those guys are at the moment. We'll actually get a better idea of who those guys will be after we have the NFL draft and we understand draft capital and we get more concrete answers in terms of where these guys land. But that's sort of the range that I'd be looking for in terms of trading Mike Evans. You're giving up some production to move down the age curve, but as we know, with these wide receivers in the age cliff, they're gonna hit that and they're gonna fall. And I'm not sure Mike Evans is entirely at the bottom of his falling on from an age cup perspective, even though he will be putting up the production there. So from a compounding perspective, which is the way I think about this is we're looking for the same age production and potential. So the same production from these guys, same age. So we're kind of trading within the same cluster, but we're looking for a lower price. And from that perspective, I'd be looking at something like a Brandon Cooks, even though he's had to move up after he got traded to a new team or signed with a new team. That would be sort of the move that I'd be trying to make from a compounding perspective, which is Mike Evans equals Brandon Cooks plus more. That plus more could be something as high as a third, but players as well in there. But that plus more then compounds, and you can do more and more stuff with that compounding process. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know who you want to see next week, and please like, comment, and subscribe down below. If you're not already part of the Devery Patreon, please join up. There's a lot of smart people in there. I know you'll get some value out of it. And you can find me on Twitter at _Jason Stein. You can also find me in the Devery Royale Patreon. And I'm also writing at the Football Guys. Thanks so much for watching, and see you guys again next week.